Hi, I'm the Octopus Lady. You're watching Alien Ocean, and let's talk about bobbit worms today, shall we? Or bobbit worms? I've seen it spelled both ways, and I'm not sure which one is correct. So this was a video topic that I was actually never going to make a video about because I could barely find any academic research on these worms, which was surprising. I feel like these worms are sort of in a perpetual state of virality on the internet due to their impressive hunting abilities and truly hideous appearance, because, like, that's a face only a mother could love. But surprise, nerds! I'm his adopted mother! How dare you say such terrible things about my child? Don't ever talk to me or my son ever again. But I guess this goes to show that just because something is popular on the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's going to garner the interest of the scientific community. Or the interest of those who grant money to the scientific community. But you know what I did find a lot of? Incorrect information about these worms. So this is what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to list off facts I've heard about bobbit worms, and I'm going to tell you which ones are true and which ones are false. But before we begin, let's get some of the usual stuff out of the way first. Bobbit worms are part of the phylum Annelida, which are the segmented worms. Or in other words, an annelid is a worm that's made up of a bunch of segments. See, that's a segment, that's a segment, that's a segment. That's not a segment, though. I'm just kidding, it totally is. Earthworms are probably the annelid you're most familiar with. Bobbit worms are also in the class Polychaete, which are, to quote my old invertebrate zoology textbook, annelids with legs. Well, not actual legs. They have what are called parapodia, which are, quote, lateral fleshy outgrowths of the body wall that may be large and complex, or little more than low nubbins or ridges, depending on species. Some polychaetes that you might be familiar with are the Pompeii and giant tube worms at the deep-sea hydrothermal vents. Oh, what's that? You aren't familiar with the Pompeii and giant tube worms at the deep-sea hydrothermal vents? Well, my friend, do I have a video for you. And then skipping down a little bit, bobbit worms are in the genus Eunice and the species Aphroditois. I have no idea if that's how you pronounce it. Bobbit worms are usually found in beds of sandy sediment in warm areas of the Indo-Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, and I don't know how long this particular species has been around. The closest paleontological information I could find about bobbit worms was an ancestor of theirs, Websteroprion armstrongi, gen et sp. Nov, which left behind imprints of its jaws in rocks that were 388 to 408 million years old, making bobbit worms just a little bit older than mantis shrimp. Or their ancestors were, anyway. Okay, now let's get into it. 1. Bobbit worms are ambush predators. If you've ever seen a video of a bobbit worm capturing prey, you know this is true. During the day, bobbit worms bury themselves in the sand, leaving only their very impressive jaws and their 5 antennae exposed. By the way, they don't always look like this. Their jaws are not always out all the time. They actually keep them stored in their throat when they aren't hunting, and then evert them when they're ready to get something to eat. This is what the worm looks like when its jaws are stored away. Just want to clarify that because I am going to use a few pictures of bobbit worms where they don't have their jaws out, and I don't want to confuse y'all. Anyway, if some unlucky creature wanders too close, those antennae will sense the vibration from the prey, and the worm will strike, snapping its jaws like a bear trap. The victim then gets dragged into the worm's lair, and presumably is eaten. We've never actually seen what happens after a bobbit worm successfully captures prey, although somebody needs to get on that because I want to see so bad. At night, the worm switches it up a little bit, and instead of hiding completely in the sand, will actually extend out of its burrow by a few inches, which makes it easier for the worm to attack passing prey. 2. Bobbit worms ain't got no eyes. False! Bobbit worms do have eyes. I have no idea where they are in this head, but they're there. Somewhere. And if you don't believe me, it has been reported that during the night, bobbit worms can be triggered to attack just by shining a flashlight on them. They wouldn't be able to do that unless they had eyes. 3. The jaws of the bobbit worm are so fast and so strong, they sometimes bite their prey in half. This is true, and I have some footage to prove it. Heads up, this video is fairly graphic. I find it difficult to watch, so if this is something you don't want to see, I don't blame you. I kind of wish I hadn't seen it myself. Skip ahead to the timestamp that's been on screen this whole time, and I'm going to show it in 3, 2, 1. Here it is. Oh god. Ugh. Oh my god, it's still alive. It's still alive. Okay, that's enough of that. That's enough. Nope, we're moving on. 4. Speaking of disturbing things, bobbit worms were named after John and Lorena Bobbit. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this without saying anything too graphic, but if you don't know who these two are, you might want to skip ahead to this timestamp if you are uncomfortable with the topic of dismemberment. That said, I'm not going to show anything, and I'm going to keep my wording pretty euphemistic because I do not want to get demonetized. So, John and Lorena Bobbit were a married couple who received international attention back in 1993 when Lorena cut John's eggplant from his body when he was sleeping. Supposedly, in the years that followed that event, scuba divers who encountered this worm gave it the name bobbit worm because the jaws of the worm were reminiscent of the scissors Lorena Bobbit used to remove her husband's eggplant. But even that isn't correct because Lorena didn't use scissors, she used a knife, and I'm getting uncomfy, I don't want to talk about this anymore. But these claims are completely unsubstantiated, there are no solid sources to back them up. We don't actually have any idea why they're called bobbit worms. Despite that, these stories seem to have mutated even further while traveling across the internet, because I've seen some people say that this worm is named after John and Lorena Bobbit because its mating habits involve the female bobbit worm biting the eggplant off of the male and feeding it to her young. And this is so wrong, it makes my brain want to snap in half. While we don't know how this exact species reproduces, we do know how other worms in the same family as bobbit worms reproduce. Basically, the male will take a bunch of segments at the end of his body and fill them up with sperm. The female will do the same, but with eggs. Then the worm will either leave their burrow and swim out into open water, or, and this is kind of wild, will sever the gamete-filled section of their body, and that by itself goes and swims out into open water. All these worms and worm parts will swarm at the water's surface and then release all their gametes, which will then mix in the water, and those fertilized eggs will eventually hatch into baby planktonic worms. They will swim around until they find a nice place to settle down and grow into adulthood. So male bobbit worms don't even have eggplants that can get bitten off, and female bobbit worms likely do not take care of their young at all. 5. Bobbit worms are venomous. Maybe. I found an interview in Wired magazine with 2 worm ecologists, and I am going to butcher their names. I apologize in advance. Sergio I. Salazar-Vallejo and Luis F. Carrera-Parra. I'm so sorry. I've spent my whole life trying to learn how to roll my R's and have never been successful, who I have seen as authors on academic papers about bobbit worms. So I'm taking this interview as a fairly reliable source. These 2 say that they believe that after a bobbit worm drags its prey into its lair, it paralyzes the prey with some sort of neurotoxin and then eats it. But I could not find any academic sources to back that up, not even in papers that these 2 researchers have published. Although, in their defense, this interview is over a decade old, they've both published a lot of papers since then, and some of them are in Spanish, so I might have missed it. I have also heard that bobbit worms are venomous to humans, either through their bite or stingers on their parapodia, or both, but in that same interview, Carrera-Parra and Salazar-Vallejo both say that isn't true. They think that people are getting bobbit worms confused with fireworms, which do have venomous stingers on their parapodia, but the venom is not deadly to people, although it can cause severe irritation to the skin. Also, bobbit worms don't even have stingers on their parapodia. That isn't to say that bobbit worms are completely harmless. If you are handling one, you still want to be careful because they can bite you hard enough to draw blood, but there have never been reports of humans dying or becoming paralyzed after being bitten by one. And no, they can't bite your fingers off either. 6. Bobbit worms have an iridescent sheen on their body. Wrong! Bobbit worms are not iridescent, they're holographic. There's a difference, and I'm going to show you using nail polish. Okay, this finger has iridescent flakies on it. This one has holographic sparkles. Do you see how the flakies only color shift between a few different colors? That's iridescence. And do you see how the sparkles shift across all the colors of the rainbow? That's holographic. Holographic equals rainbows. This worm has a hollow taco on it. I don't know if anyone is going to get this reference. 7. Bobbit worms were the inspiration for one of the most iconic creatures in all of science fiction, the sandworms from Frank Herbert's Dune. Okay, so in order to confirm or deny this claim, I read Dreamer of Dune, the biography of Frank Herbert, written by Brian Herbert, who is Frank Herbert's son. Yes, I read an entire book for a very small part of this video. You're welcome. But Brian goes into incredible detail when he catalogs all the various sources of inspiration that his father drew from when he was writing Dune. To give a tiny handful of examples, the Bene Gesserit were based on Frank Herbert's maternal aunts, who tried to convert him to Catholicism as a kid, and psychologist Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious. Sandwalking was taken from Frank's childhood experiences of learning how to hunt, and specifically learning how to move in ways that wouldn't draw the attention of prey. There's poetry in the Dune books, and some of it was modeled after, quote, Provençal lyrics, the court poetry of troubadours in southwestern France and the Mediterranean between the late 11th and mid-13th centuries. The name Harkonnen? Frankie Boy got that out of a phone book. I'm telling you all this to emphasize the fact that Dreamer of Dune doesn't give vague overviews of where Frank Herbert got inspiration for his novel. It gives nitty-gritty details. So if the sandworms were in fact inspired by bobbit worms, this book would tell us. Right? There would be a sentence in here that says something like, my dad took inspiration for the sandworms from a real-life marine worm that hides in sand and waits until it senses nearby prey, at which point it springs out and attacks. But it doesn't. There's not a single mention of bobbit worms or anything that sounds even remotely like bobbit worms in this book. What actually inspired the sandworms was a completely different kind of worm. This kind of worm. or worm, depending on your preferred spelling. See, Dune is, among so many other things, a modern retelling of ancient legends and myths. Frank Herbert actually spent a considerable amount of time studying the classic hero's journey, which sometimes involved said hero having to reckon with a dragon in order to gain access to great treasure. For reference, see the Greek myth of Jason and the Golden Fleece and the epic poem of Beowulf. By the way, did you know that in Old English, the language that Beowulf was written in, the word worm can be translated into serpent or dragon? Isn't that interesting? Basically, the sandworms in Dune were stand-ins for the dragons you would normally see in those ancient heroic tales. And Polychaetes is obviously the hero, and Spice is obviously the treasure. In a 1969 interview with Professor Willis McNelly, Frank Herbert himself says that the sandworm is, quote, the archetypal black beast, the one who lives underground in the cavern with the gold. So, no, bobbit worms were not the inspiration for the sandworms in Dune, dragons were. Although, side note, bobbit worms do have another common name, the sand striker, which sounds so much cooler, and TBH does have some real Dune energy to it. 8. Speaking of giant worms, the longest bobbit worm ever recorded was a foot long. No, 30 feet long. No, hundreds of feet long! Alright, everyone calm down. 10 feet. The longest bobbit worm ever recorded was 299 centimeters, which is almost 10 feet long. I wouldn't be surprised if they do get longer than that, but 30 feet, hundreds of feet, you rock up with claims like that and you need to bring solid, peer-reviewed evidence. 9. Cutting a bobbit worm in half doesn't kill it. Instead, the two halves will eventually regenerate into two separate but fully functioning worms. This is 100% true, but I've seen some of those terrible, clickbaity, AI-generated garbage YouTube shorts about bobbit worms, and they make it sound like this is something unique to bobbit worms, clearly as a way to fearmonger, which, no, all sorts of worms will regenerate into two separate ones if they're split in half, and more if they're split into even more pieces. Earthworms can do this, for goodness sake. This is not some horrific mutant ability that is possessed only by bobbit worms. It comes standard on most annelids. 10. Bobbit worms can wreak havoc for people who keep aquariums. Yep. True. This is mostly applicable to people who keep reef aquariums, though. To give a little background there, if you want to keep a coral tank, you have to have substrate for the corals to grow on. And corals can't really grow on anything except for the skeletons of other dead corals, which is so metal, and I'm totally gonna make a video someday about how beautiful serene reefs like this one are in reality terrifying war zones from the perspective of a coral. But anyway, we call these dead skeletons live rock, and you can only get them from the ocean, which means sometimes the live rock that you just put in your coral tank might have some hitchhikers on it. The Blue Reef Aquarium in the UK experienced this firsthand back in 2009 when the corals in their reef tank kept being inexplicably damaged. Some of them were just sliced in half, which baffled the aquarists. Aquarists, by the way, are basically zookeepers, but they exclusively take care of aquatic organisms. I used to be one. So it actually kind of stressed me out a little bit to read these articles, because what the aquarists ended up having to do was take apart the entire reef tank, rock by rock, until they found whatever was damaging their corals. And I cannot emphasize enough what a nightmare that must have been for them. That would have been such a nightmare. They eventually discovered the culprit, and it was, of course, a bobbit worm measuring about 4 feet long, or at least something that looked like a bobbit worm. I'm not exactly sure if this guy is this exact species, but it definitely looks like a worm from the same family. Anyway, the aquarists never intentionally put this worm in that coral tank, because that would be a very stupid thing to do, so they assumed it was probably hanging out on a piece of live rock that they added to the tank when this worm was much, much smaller. And apparently, the aquarium really didn't have too many hard feelings towards this agent of chaos, because they got him his own bachelor pad. They stuck him in a tank, a very coral-free tank, and put him on display. They named him Barry, and he kind of became a little bit of a celebrity for a hot second, with interest for him coming in from at least 12 different countries, and an American rabbi even wrote a poem about him. Isn't that kind of sweet? I also found this thread on a forum for aquarium hobbyists, posted by a guy who discovered a bobbit worm in his home aquarium, and it was, unsurprisingly, hurting his fish and damaging his corals. And in his desperation to rid his tank of this emissary of destruction, he fed it all manner of terrible things that should have killed the worm, and none of it worked. I wish I had the time to summarize the whole thing, because it is absolutely buck wild, but I don't, so if you want to read it for yourself, I've linked to it in the description. So there we go. These were, I think, the most most commonly shared facts on the internet about the bobbit worm. Some were true, and some were not. I wish I could have gone into way more detail about how their jaws work, how they hunt, and what happens after they capture prey, but I guess it wasn't in the cards. Hopefully at some point in the future, there'll be more research done about the bobbit worm, and I'll be able to make a kind of sequel to this video, going into way more in-depth, scientifically based explanations about how these worms work. In the meantime, if you're looking for more high-quality science videos like mine, then may I introduce you to my streaming service, Nebula. Nebula is a streaming platform that's filled with awesome content from some of your favorite creators, like Joe Scott, Real Science, and me, and we've recently completely redesigned Nebula as a whole. We didn't just slap on a fresh coat of paint, we added new features that make Nebula both more friendly to users like you and to creators like me. For example, we just added category homepages, which include news, culture, history, podcasts, classes, and science, which is obviously the best one, and each category is like its own mini-service, allowing you to find creators and videos more relevant to your interests. Although, if I may give a recommendation, I really enjoyed Joe Scott's series, Mysteries of the Human Body, which is kind of saying something, because TBH, I usually don't find humans very interesting, but yeah, human bodies can get real weird real fast. This series is one of our many Nebula originals, which is content you can't watch anywhere else, but we're also going to be rolling out a bunch of new Nebula originals, broken up into two different types, fact and fiction, which includes a new documentary from Bobby Broccoli called The Baltimore Scandal. We wouldn't be able to fund all these new projects without the support from our members, and if you'd like to become one, you have two options. If you sign up using my link at nebula.tv/theoctopuslady, or use the link below, you can either get Nebula for 40% off annual plans, or as little as $250 a month, or you can get yourself a lifetime membership, which means you pay $300 once, and then you get access to Nebula for literally ever. Regardless of which one you pick, your support will directly help me and creators like me continue to make high quality and entertaining content. And with that, thanks for watching another episode of Alien Ocean. I know some of you might be a little surprised because I said in my last video that I wasn't sure when I was going to be able to release another one because of some health issues I was having, but I was recently put on a new medication that is doing a pretty good job of managing my symptoms, except, it makes me a terrible insomniac. But that's fine. It's fine. This is fine. Why waste time sleeping when I can spend those extra hours making new videos? This is a completely sustainable way to live my life. If it turns out my whole career in biology has been a lie and the actual reason why life exists on this planet is because of intelligent design, then if I ever meet God, it's on sight. He's gonna catch all 8 of these hands. Anyway, I also just want to say thanks to everyone who left comments on my last video, wishing me well and hoping I get better soon. They were all so sweet, and I especially appreciate those who commiserated with me on having a chronic illness. It brought me genuine comfort to know that I wasn't the only one whose corporeal form is being stupid. Also, major shout out to all my new patrons. Thank you to everyone who signed up. I don't like asking for help and was very nervous to openly ask for support while I'm dealing with these health issues, and I was so worried everyone was going to accuse me of lying or call me greedy or whatever. I don't know. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I really, really appreciate my patrons, both the ones who recently signed up and the ones who've stuck around even when I wasn't making a lot of content. Y'all are the best. If you'd like to sign up for my Patreon, I've linked to it in the description. You can get early access to videos or your name in the beautiful credits, or if you just want to support me, Patreon is the best way to do it. You can also follow me over on Twitter if you want to see me be a big old marine biology nerd on a daily basis, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe and all that. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood octopus lady, reminding you that you don't have to go into space to find aliens. Okay, before we go, I gotta talk about something really quick. I've mentioned in a previous video that I'm kinda really into Greek mythology, and I just gotta ask, what is this name? Because this part of it looks a lot like the name Aphrodite. And Aphrodite does not like it when she's told that she's anything less than the most beautiful being in the cosmos, and her name got plastered onto a worm that looks like this? And look, he's my adopted son. I love him very much. I think he's very handsome. But I don't think the Greek goddess of love and beauty is going to agree. And then I found out that the person who gave this creature this name was someone named Pallas. And Pallas, spelled exactly like this, is an epithet for Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom and strategy. And an epithet is sorta like a nickname, kinda, not really, whatever. This isn't a Greek mythology channel. I don't have to be accurate about this. But Athena and Aphrodite famously have beef with each other, and said beef got so bad that it kicked off one of the most legendary wars in history. This guy literally wouldn't stop talking about it. And I'm just like, Athena, did you name this worm after Aphrodite as a way to get back at her? Because if so, girl, What is wrong with you? Are you trying to start another Trojan War?